Coming up on Chasing the Natty, spring camps are getting underway all across the country, and today Nicholas, Ian, Allen, and I will be diving into 10 teams whose spring camps we'll be paying very close attention to, whose outcomes could shake up the CFF landscape as the offseason moves along. All that and more coming right after this.
Look at GT go, breaks the tackle, he's 10, he's touchdown! Cook's gonna throw the deep ball, and Burton past the defense! Touchdown, Luther Burton!
Milrow gonna run it again, got a lane, kicked in the turbo, Milrow! Goodbye! Touchdown, Bama!
This is Chasing the Natty, a college fantasy football podcast. All right, welcome in everyone. This is Jared Palmgren, host of the Chasing the Natty podcast. I hope you guys are having a wonderful ride to your work on this Monday morning. We are the College Fantasy Football Podcast on the Campus Canton Podcast Network. You can find us on all of your podcast feeds and on YouTube every Monday morning during the off season at 6 a.m. sharp. If you want to support the great work we're doing here, head on over to campuscanton.com and subscribe there with one of our tiers. You'll find everything you need for your CFF, Devy, C2C, IDP, betting needs, pretty much whatever you want to play when it comes to college football. We got rankings, we got articles, we got tools, we got ADP now, and even more than that. You can also find me on the show on Twitter. I'm at CFF_Jared, and the show is at Chasing the Natty, and the handsome fella to my right is Mr. Nicholas Ian Allen. He is at CFB Winning Edge on Twitter, owner of CFB Winning Edge and C2C Winning Edge here at Campus of Canton. Nick, how are you doing today, sir?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Of course, man. We got a long show here today. I think we got a ton of information to give everybody, not only with spring camps, but again, we got the announcement of the ADP. I really want to show people off a little bit in terms of what you can do with that. But again, specifically with these 10 spring camps, man, I'm looking at things across the college football world, and I kind of realized that in college fantasy, we kind of go through 3 stages every offseason, right? We start off with what I say is finding our known knowns. All right. That is like we take inventory, we figure out, all right, who's returning, who's going, who can we count on to repeat what they did last year, who is kind of set in stone. All right, we're thinking they're going to do what they do again next year. Then we start moving on to the second stage, and I think that's where we're starting to get to now, which is finding our known unknowns. Like this is where we're starting to look at different rooms where maybe, a wide receiver room where the top receiver's gone off, and we're realizing like, okay, we know for a fact that a wide receiver from this room is going to be great for CFF this year. We just don't know who that is going to be yet. And so that's when we start sitting back and realizing like, okay, this is where we need to put our focus in terms of research for this offseason. These are the guys we need to pay attention to. And so I think that's really going to be my theme here today when we look at these spring camps. I'm going to be looking at different rooms where I know for a fact that they are going to be great for CFF moving forward, but there's still a lot that we need to learn from. It's kind of something I picked up on last week when Kris K and I were discussing ADP. It really struck me just how much we still have to learn in the last, 6-7 months we have until games start up again and everything. So plenty of time to learn. What about you, Nick? When it comes to spring camps, what are you looking for most overall?
Well, I really like how you put that with the known knowns, and that's a big part of what I've done so far this year. We were talking before the show, and of course you know this because we interact on a pretty much daily basis in the Campus to Canton Discord, or not Discord, Slack, sometimes Discord. I try to get in there fairly often as well, but I've been working on the CFP Winning Edge returning production database, or actually, we put a lot of work into that basically at the very end of last season, and we're able to publish that I guess about a month ago now. And so that, what you said about known knowns is basically what that database aims to show, right? Who's
Mm-hmm.
coming back, who's not, who is new as far as a transfer coming in. We don't yet include, freshmen or junior college signees, things like that. But as far as players who have played primarily, FBS football, whether it's at their current school or, moving into a new program, that's what we, try to show and try to color code to make it easy to see, all right, who's run out of eligibility, who left early for the NFL, who's transferring out, who's transferring in, all that good stuff. And that's a bit of a transition now once that database is out there, once it's published, once our members are using it. And I still, make updates in there as we need. But the next part of my big off-season schedule is working on some of those non-unknowns, as you mentioned. And the next big project that I do is our CFP Winning Edge and C2C Winning Edge team profiles, which we will be looking to publish. We don't have a firm date just yet, but I'm shooting for the end of April. And that's where we really go through and put in those freshmen, put in those JUCO players, put in all the FCS or in some cases lower tier transfers who could potentially have an impact, update everybody as far as, they were a sophomore last year, now they're a junior. How does that impact their player rating? How does that player rating impact the overall unit rating? How does that impact the roster rating as a whole and the team and all that good stuff? So people who've heard me talk before, I'm sure, are fairly familiar with all that. But I never really thought about how those two big projects, the first big projects for me in the off season, kind of fall into those categories, as you put it. And also did want to mention, we're definitely going to be talking CFF here, and this is going to be a little bit of I'll be learning along with our audience. I'm sure I'm in the same boat as some of our listeners, and I'm sure some of our listeners have been far more engaged in the early best balls and other CFF drafts that have been popping up over the last month or so, because I haven't done one since our very first one that you put together in the way too early, where I lucked into that first overall pick. And so I'm definitely learning along, digging into spring reports, trying to find useful information, trying to pass that along on my new morning show that's on the Campus to Canton YouTube channel. Most weekday mornings at 10 a.m. we go live there. But yeah, I very long-winded. I'll try to be more brief as we move on, but that's a big part of what I've been working on, is to try to unearth some of those known unknowns, both through working on the team profiles, reading as much as I can, updates from beat reporters, things like that, about spring practices, just to learn a little bit more beyond just who's coming back and who's not.
No, absolutely. And for those of you who might be wondering, again, I mentioned 3 stages. We only talked about 2, the known knowns and then finding the known unknowns. Well, stage 3 is finding the unknown unknowns. That's when we kind of take that deeper dive. Nick's probably going to have a head start on all of us when it comes to those team profiles here soon. But that, we all know, playing college fantasy football every year, there are guys that come out of just absolutely nowhere because, a system trend has been bucked. A guy's just way more talented than everybody else. Maybe it's a running back that pops out in a place that usually has a committee. Maybe it's a slot receiver just being so dominant in a system that typically features the outside wide receiver, things like that. Maybe it's just a quarterback lifting his entire offense much bigger and better than they have been in the past. That's kind of the third stage. That's kind of further down the line. Once we kind of recognize, again, what do we already know and what do we know that we don't know? That's when we go even a step further there and say, all right, what could possibly change this year? What are those X factors that could absolutely shake things up moving forward? Again, if you want to potentially have a head start on that, absolutely be on the lookout for the C2C Winning Edge team profiles here in a little bit, because I think that'll be the first place I am looking when it comes to trying to find those trends of guys that seem to be potentially bucking trends moving forward. So, and then I added a little note underneath this portion where I talk about this, that in addition to everything else, sprinkled throughout the offseason is the disknown knowns, which is where, an injury occurs, a transfer happens, and we got to rethink the entire way a team occurs. But that's kind of all throughout the offseason. That's not really one stage throughout it. But interesting talk there, I think. But again, like I said, we're definitively in stage 2. That's what I'm really going to be talking about with each of these teams. I'll be talking about, all right, what do we know and what do we don't know yet about this system moving forward? Nick, you got any other thoughts on that before we move on to a few announcements, and then we'll get right into some of these spring camps?
Well, I mean, not really.
No, totally fine.
There was something I did want to say, and it left my brain, unfortunately. So I'll avoid another long diatribe, and we'll move on.
Sounds good. If you rethink it, let me know. But for now, we'll get over to a few of these announcements real quick. One that I'm really excited to announce to everybody is the fact that probably I'd say earlier than ever and more complete than ever, we have CFF ADP officially available on the Campus of Canton website. This is not something you need to pay an arm and a leg for. It is available at our lowest tier to anybody subscribed to the website, which is only $3 a month. You can have access to our complete ADP set. Again, we have had tons of best balls running. Again, huge shout out to Ryan Carpenter, who has been running just non-stop number of best balls pretty much since the season got started. I've been running a few mock drafts here and there. I just started up 2 best balls this weekend. I'll continue to run those throughout the draft. I know Mike Bainbridge and the CFF site have a couple of best balls going now. We'll include their ADP whenever we can as well. So again, it'll be super complete, wide variety of different drafters. Drafters is not the same 12, 15 people that are drafting in every one of these. Good mix of different people. And again, it's available on our website. If you're watching this on YouTube, I'll show you guys a couple of things real quick. If you want to find it real quick, it's very easy. 2 ways you can find it. You can click on the 3 lines at the top, and it's on the side panel here, just again under ADP, and then you go to it and you can click on CFF. And then the other way to do it, you can't see it right now because my window is smushed at the moment, but at the top here, normally you'll be able to see ADP there as well, and you can just click that and go to it as well. The other thing I really want to share, it is something I am super proud of. So again, maybe some of y'all out there maybe don't find this super impressive, but I'm happy that I was able to provide this for the CFF Campus of Canton and Devi community. Is a draft predictor tool that we have available at campusofcanton.com. Again, also available to all of our members, everybody subscribed to the website. How you find that? Again, same way as the ADP. You find the ADP tab here. It's right there at the very bottom, the CFF C2C Devi draft predictor. You click there. What I find very cool about this draft predictor is that it takes ADP and goes a step beyond ADP. ADP, as many of you know, again, it's just average draft position. And that can give you a pretty good idea of where people are going in drafts. But there's kind of a secondary thing that happens in drafts, right? 2 guys can have an ADP of 24, which is like, again, end of the second round in most drafts, right? But there's a huge difference between a guy who basically always goes right there at the end of the second round versus a guy that maybe creeps up into the beginning of the second round, maybe end of the first round, but also can fall as late as like the end of the third round. So like, again, they'll have the same ADP, but that variance is so much different. That's where this draft predictor tool comes in. It is very, very helpful to me. I use it all the time in my drafts to try to build out the best teams that I possibly can. Again, for those watching it on YouTube, you'll have some visuals for this. If you're listening to this on podcast, I'll do my best to describe what's happening here. But I'm in a best ball right now, right? Currently, I'm at the 6'10". I want to be able to draft both Garrett Green and KJ Jefferson to this team. Again, I'm at the 6'10". I'd like to be able to grab one at 6'10", one in the 7th round, 3rd pick. If I go and just use ADP, so I'll go to ADP here real quick, and I search up, the website could be a little bit faster. There we go. All right, so CFF. If I search up KJ Jefferson, or let's go, actually we'll filter by position here. We'll go quarterback. KJ Jefferson and Garrett Green are right next to each other in ADP. Again, QB 6 and 7. And their ADPs are, in the month of February, was 60.2 for Garrett Green and 61.5 for KJ Jefferson. Those ADPs are super close together, basically telling me that like I shouldn't be able to get both of those guys onto the same team. And that could still very well happen, of course. Like these guys typically go close to each other. That's why they have their, or are typically go in the same range. That's why their ADPs are so close to each other. But with the draft predictor tool, once again, it takes into account that variance. So a guy like KJ Jefferson goes in that same range every single draft. He is very much always taken right at the same spot versus Garrett Green varies from draft to draft here. And you'll see this here in a second. So I'm going to use the draft predictor tool here. Again, you enter the number of your teams. Let's select a player. Let's do KJ Jefferson first. I enter the current pick. So I would say my 6th round pick, which is 6'10". My future pick is 7'3". And according to our draft predictor tool, there will be an 82% likelihood that KJ Jefferson will be drafted by the time it makes it back to my 7'3" pick. Now let's look at Garrett Green. Take KJ Jefferson out, put Garrett Green in. Same picks. Again, 6'10", 7'3". According to our draft predictor tool, there's only a 25.5% chance that Garrett Green will be taken by the time it comes back around because it realizes, looking at the raw ADP data that we give it with all these drafts, it realizes that there are more drafts where Garrett Green makes it past the 7'3" pick than it does for KJ Jefferson. Now, it also realizes that there are drafts where Garrett Green goes much sooner, but because that variance is there, it takes all that into account. It's a great tool. Again, I'm going on a long diatribe here talking about this tool, but again, I think it's super, super helpful for everybody out there who is really trying to plan out their next couple of steps in a draft. Like again, you can use raw ADP, but this, in my opinion, really kind of helps you maximize that ability to get guys to fall to you in the next round based on what it has seen from other drafts. So hopefully this doesn't come out by the time I'm able to make those next 2 picks and people don't snipe me on that turn and everything like that. But that's the way I use it. It's a great tool in my opinion. So enough of that. Let me run through the rest of these announcements real quick. Again, you guys have heard these before. The freshman supplemental guide for Campus to Canton is available now online. Again, great for CFF Dynasty, great for C2C winning or C2C leagues. If you need a place to start when it comes to learning about the incoming freshmen and their fantasy impact moving forward, both at the college and NFL level, that is the place I would start. Next up, we talked about it before with Nick, so I won't go too deep in depth here, but the C2C Winning Edge package now has the returning production database. Again, I use this all the time. I will probably reference it at least 1 or 2 times in this show because I use it preparing for these shows, again, to make sure that I'm not missing anything when it comes to who is back and who is leaving, who's coming in via the transfer portal, stuff like that. It's a great tool, pretty much the holy Bible for me right now this early in the offseason. And with that, I think we're ready to get into some of these spring camps that we're keeping an eye on here. Nick, you provided me 5 schools that you are keeping an eye on right now. You gave me 5 Power 4 schools, so I took it upon myself to look at the G5, and we'll go through basically 5 Power 4 schools, 5 G5/independent schools that we're keeping an eye on here. So, Nick, we're going to start with you and one of your schools that you're looking at, and it is the Ohio State Buckeyes. So, Nick, what are you looking for with the Buckeyes?
First, I picked teams that I've been able to find good information, and I mean, we're fortunate with Ohio State, the just amount of effort that is put into covering the Buckeyes. Traditional sources like papers from teams from the places like 247 and On3, which of course do great work across a wide range of teams. But Ohio State, one of the elite programs in the country year in and year out, both from a just standard college football sense, but also from college fantasy football, of course. Fortunately, there are a couple of interesting things to discuss. We don't know 100% sure quite yet who the starting quarterback is going to be. All all indications, well, maybe not all indications, all projection, speculation among pretty much everybody that I've read or heard discuss it, expect, Will Howard to emerge as the starter, the transfer from Kansas State. Early reports, are that Devin Brown is actually taking those first reps in spring. So, boots on the ground are giving us that information. How much stock are we going to put into, who takes the first rep in an individual drill in, practice 1, practice 2 of the spring? We are still, of course, very, very early, but definitely we'll be paying attention if we do get any reason to expect that, Devin Brown really has a legitimate shot to come out ahead and be the starter in week 1. That, of course, will be significant. I'm still, very skeptical that we will learn anything like that, certainly in spring practice, but, even before the season. But also, as you've got listed here on the show, how is that wide receiver pecking order going to shake out? Emeka Egbuka back as the only lone returning starter, but plenty of talented options in Jayden Ballard, Brandon Inniss, the elite true freshman coming in, and I still need to really dig into the freshman and supplemental guide to fully get a grasp on more than just the very top guys, but even I know Jeremiah Smith and how well he has been considered across college football. So, and then of course, Cornell Tate, I failed to mention him before. But so we'll certainly be, working on that pecking order. What can we find as far as, who is looking like they're going to slot into those starting roles? Can Smith emerge quickly as a starter or major contributor? And then the running back situation. Two of the very best running backs in college football are going to be sharing the workload in Columbus this year with the addition of Quinshon Judkins joining Travion Henderson. How's that going to shake out? Are both of those guys going to be, high-end fantasy relevant? Who's going to get, is it going to be 50-50? Is it going to be 60-40? Henderson, both of them really had, some injuries that slowed him down at points in the past. Are we going to get any indicators on things like that? So plenty of storylines for Ohio State, and we're already learning a few little details, at least as far as, who's number 1, who's number 2 in line when they're going through one-on-ones or 7-on-7 and things like that. But it's a program that I'm going to be following very closely, just based on the level of production we've seen in the past, based on Chip Kelly coming in as the offensive play caller, what's going to be new about that. And then just how are these positions going to shake out? Because one thing, I think the thought that left my mind earlier was that I don't have your level of confidence to say I know certain programs are going to be elite CFF producers. I'm still kind of well, do we know for sure? Like, can we guarantee that when all this stuff is changing, new quarterback, 2 elite running backs, best receiving core we've seen in a long, long time.
Well, that's where the unknown unknowns come in.
Right. Yeah. I mean, is there some indicator that would show us that maybe it's not, just automatic that the next man up is going to become an elite producer at the CFF level? But I probably need to get over that, because that causes me to miss out sometimes on what are mostly slam dunks. But anyway, getting back to it, Ohio State, I do have a high level of confidence that once we get the answers to these questions, it's going to make a big impact on our performance in CFF leagues. But still, I'm definitely, trying to figure out, because there are so many questions. We don't know who the tight end is going to be, for example, as well. So Ohio State, great team, have high expectations for them, but still plenty of questions and things we don't fully know.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that I like based on the stuff I've been reading, kind of adding on to what you're saying about each of the position groups. Again, yes, I'm reading the same things where Devin Brown's getting first reps ahead of Will Howard. That to me seems like a courtesy thing. Again, you're not going to automatically give the transfer first reps. Talk to me when Brown is getting reps ahead of Howard in like the spring game and the scrimmages leading up to the spring game. I think that'll be a much more newsworthy event. The running backs are interesting. Again, credit to Nate Marquise here for finding this nugget in terms of Judkins and Henderson's weight. Judkins actually added weight since his time at Ole Miss. Again, he's up to 219, so very clearly just building himself up there. Meanwhile, Trayvon's actually shedding a little bit of weight, down 4 pounds to 208. I really think that we're set to see the classic thunder and lightning combo that Chip Kelly has had multiple times in the past with his running backs here. And Judkins and Henderson slot right into those two, so I would base your expectations on what those two do based on the history there. And then last but not least, again, you talked about receivers a little bit. And again, obviously things can change. Jeremiah Smith, obviously a big X factor, but like guys like Brandon Inniss are still there. 5-star receiver coming in from last year. I do think it is notable that Jayden Ballard is currently slotted into that third receiver spot. I think people kind of forget about Ballard quite a bit. He didn't do anything last year, which kind of shocked me, considering that they ran him out there quite a bit 2 years ago. And so it's good to see him back. I think that he can be a productive receiver for them. But even so, I am guilty of the fact that I just automatically started sliding Brandon Inniss into that third receiver spot, even though he didn't do much last year. I was like, well, he's a talented dude, and there's nobody really in that third spot. Kind of forgot about Ballard. He's a guy that I would probably keep an eye on, and again, if you're a believer in this offense overall, again, I know some people have questions regarding Will Howard's passing ability and how much they're going to spread the ball around, but if they spread the ball around a little bit, and Ballard locks in that third spot, he'll have himself a couple of good games and probably not a terrible flyer pick at the end of a best ball or anything like that. So that's kind of my takeaways from what I've read on Ohio State. You got any more thoughts there, Nick?
Well, to me, as far as wide receivers go, and again, I'm definitely rusty on thinking fully like a CFF drafter. So certainly keep that in mind. But some of the things, once I do get back into drafts, I don't know how much I'll really be investing in Ohio State because I do see so many different potential scenarios playing out. And one of them is just the way people are talking about Jeremiah Smith right now is just different than you normally hear people talk about a true freshman. So he's already, repping with the number 2s. Pretty much everything I've seen listed, with the 2s, his name is mentioned ahead of Brandon Inniss. So what does that mean on March, 8th, 9th, 10th, whatever? Probably very little. Mm-hmm. But the way that beat reporters are talking about him, and you do have to be careful sometimes. You have to have a understanding of who is likely to buy in a little too early on some hype and who is a little bit more guarded with what they say, but also player quotes. And Ohio State's really good about making players available to the media, and there were some that I touched on recently in Good Morning College Football about Denzel Burke, who would have been an NFL draft pick at corner had he left Ohio State. He is raving about Jeremiah Smith. So, I pay attention to what quarterbacks say about receivers. I also pay attention when I am able to hear about how, players on the other side of football view them. And I don't know, they're, the things that people are saying right now about Jeremiah Smith and how ready he looks at this very, very early stage have my attention. So I would not be at all surprised if he's a week 1 starter. Just how it shakes out, whether that'll impact Ballard or Inniss or whoever. But that the sort of things that I'm reading and seeing at this, again, very, very early stage, just make that something I'm going to keep in mind that could potentially limit the ceiling of some of those other guys that we think right now are probably the better bet to be wide receiver 2 or 3, but also raise the ceiling a little bit for what we could expect from a true freshman, who usually I stay far away from true freshmen in best balls, but usually there's one or two that really catch my eye and I fall in love with. And I think Jeremiah Smith is right now the number one guy in that category who I might be willing to take a late flyer on earlier than I otherwise would.
Yeah, let me see if I can look up his ADP real quick. 'Cause I know for a fact he has been going in some of these drafts. I don't know if he's within the 20th round, which is usually where our ADP kind of cuts off a little bit. Again, I've been trying to fix. There's a glitch that keeps it from going past the 20th round. But yeah, his ADP is 167 in February. So you're looking at, doing this off the top of my head, you're looking at right at the end of the 13th round, beginning of the 14th round. If I'm doing the math in my head correctly there. So again, clearly people very willing to take the shot on his talent there.
And to me at first, as you say it, 13th round, that seems a little high. I am talking about how people are glowing about him. And it seems like already there are people who are more in love with him than I am. I think it's just maybe just as important, the fact that, maybe he emerges as a starter. Maybe he's, plays a lot, but isn't that productive, but that eats into the opportunities for guys like Ballard, Inniss, maybe even Tate. Probably not Ikainka, but who knows?
Probably. Maybe. All right, let's move on to my first camp that I'm looking at here. Again, going down to the G5 level. Kind of touched on these guys a little bit as the season's gone on because I've had plenty of praise for Tulane so far this offseason. Again, people know how much I love the John Sumrall hire. I think they've made a Power 4 level hire with him. Fantastic replacement for Willie Fritz there. And I've talked about how they brought in some very interesting pieces to this offense. We kind of had a small little, not debate, but a little discussion in our CFF Slack recently on Ty Thompson versus Kai Horton. A lot of people seem to be automatically assuming that Ty Thompson, being the former 4, almost 5-star that he is, should be able to come into Tulane and take over from there. But let's not forget that Kai Horton was in the portal this offseason, and this new staff convinced him to come back. Now, maybe that's a depth thing. I don't know for sure. I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility that Kai Horton could still hold on to this job if the staff was willing to kind of bring him back out of the portal and make sure that they keep him around for this team moving forward. That's one of the things I'll be looking for as we go along here. And then the other one to me is Mario Williams. Like, he's the other kind of X factor in this offense, right? I don't think we're giving enough credit to the potential that Mario Williams has at Tulane this year. Yes, I've clowned him in the past. I hated his value at USC with how much they spread the ball around, how he just wasn't a very good wide receiver in general, which I think kind of shows playing out here that he transferred again after USC and he did not land at a Power 4 school. He goes down to the American Athletic Conference. But that's kind of the point now, isn't it? He's now a big fish in a small pond. Like, he still has that former 4-star talent there. And he goes there. If it is Ty Thompson, he has a former 4/5-star quarterback throwing in the ball. Again, obviously, neither one of them hitting the ceiling that they had before, but they don't need that ceiling to be productive against the likes of SMU, against the likes of UTSA, against schools like that. And then there's also the system aspect of it. John Sumrall quietly has had a pretty productive receiver in the slot the last 2 years. Now, Tej Johnson getting 72 targets in year 1 is not the most impressive thing in the world, but again, if you go back to that passing game, clearly they still had some stuff to work on, and maybe that happens again this year. But then the very next year, Jabray Barber getting 93 targets in the slot there, and the slot position clearly is the number one spot that John Sumrall and his system typically goes to. So Mario Williams played in the slot at USC, played in the slot at Oklahoma, more than likely played in the slot at Tulane. I'm not really worried about him not getting a starting role here, considering that Kris Brazzell, Lawrence Keys, Jaquan Johnson are all gone. And the only person they bring back is Youth Keith Brown, who plays on the outside. And so I'm thinking Mario Williams starts day one, and I really think that he has 100 target potential. And he's a guy that you can easily get past the 14th, 15th round in your drafts. And anytime you can get a receiver that has 100 target upside, that to me is a great pick no matter what range you get him in, let alone that far down. So that's kind of the two things I'm looking at again. Kai Horton, Ty Thompson, is that really a competition? We'll find out pretty soon, I think. And then how well does Mario Williams settle in here? Because I really think he is the receiver to own in this offense moving forward. Nick, your thoughts?
Yeah, I like that. I think you make a really good point about the Troy receiving production with Summerall and that staff. You mentioned Barber. Chris Lewis was also, really came on as a big play receiver, double-digit touchdowns overall last season. Basically a third of his catches went for scores. But the thing on the quarterbacks to me, I'm not sure how interested I am on either at this moment, quite honestly. I think that if I decided, all right, I'm going to take one of these guys no matter what and kind of, plant my flag on who starts. I think I would be rooting for Ty Thompson because he can run a little bit, I think. I won't pretend to be, super familiar with his profile as a recruit.
He can run decently. I'm looking at his rushing numbers now. He had 8 for 48 last year, and then 3 for 10 his true freshman year. So again,
small sample, but it looks like in those opportunities he has shown a willingness to take off and run here and there. Looking at Kai Horton, last year he was credited with 24 carries, negative yards, some sacks in there for sure. Did score a couple of touchdowns. But Kai Horton reminds me a lot, at least, statistically speaking, which could be good for his, shot at winning this job, but also maybe bad if we're thinking about his CFF potential. Reminds me a little more of the profile of Gunnar Watson, who, passing numbers wise last year ended up looking pretty good. 3,500 yards, 27 touchdowns, only 6 interceptions. But, I pulled up one of my CFF leagues. That doesn't necessarily equate to, a great CFF performance. And he had one game in the last 5, and I know you count these differently than me, including bowl games. And
one game over 30 points.
Right. So, he's steady, won a lot of football games, won championships at Troy, but not a CFF producer. So, if and I could be totally wrong on if, Gunnar Watson, if Kai Horton is the, reincarnate or whatever. But, Ty Thompson, if we're able to put him in a system that's going to produce that type of passing production, but also you add in a little bit more running ability, then I'm more interested. One, he's got, the background as a premium recruit. I am a little bit worried that despite that background, coaches that have coached him have repeatedly brought in transfers to basically take that job from him when it looked like maybe he might be the next man up the last couple of years. But now he's going to, have an opportunity to go out and win the job you would expect. And if he gets it, if he can, put up numbers similar, his passing numbers last year, really great. and again, a very, very small sample, averaged, 9.5 yards per attempt, 4 touchdowns, 1 interception, 77.5 completion percentage. Of course, at Oregon, the ADOT was 6.5 for Thompson. Much different than what Horton had at Tulane last year. He was, throwing bombs, basically 11.5 almost average depth of target. But anyway, probably getting a little too into the weeds, but I'm a little bit worried because this quarterback competition is somewhat neck and neck. And, if you give it 50% that Horton wins the job, that makes it, where I'm not really interested in either, because I just don't think the rushing production is going to be there. Plus, I'm going to be constantly worried that, Ty Thompson will eventually wrestle this job away. And on the 50% that, Ty Thompson gets it, I think there's a lot more upside there, but also, I mean, I'm a little bit worried that he just hasn't been able to get the job done yet, fully win a job and produce on the field. So, do these coaches who've recruited incoming transfers with Ty Thompson still on the roster, what do they know that I don't? Maybe he's just not as good as that recruiting profile. And so maybe he's just not going to be able to, take that to the field as a full-time starter on a Tulane roster that's got a lot of turnover, as you mentioned, all the receivers that are leaving. And yeah, I agree that, if we're able to take what Troy did and apply it to the receivers, I really think that Mario Williams has a chance to excel, but also I'm just not fully bought in on either quarterback. So that worries me a little bit as well.
No, I totally get that. We'll play a little exercise here. Again, obviously, you can only go so far with this, but like Gunnar Watson was QB 45 last year, right? He had negative 100 rushing yards, like you mentioned. So, like you said, if Ty Thompson can replicate his passing numbers, but can have a little bit of rushing production here, I don't even think you need much. Like, let's say 250 rushing yards compared to, negative 100. That puts him at 35 more fantasy points. So that puts him at, Gunnar Watson got 227 last year in the regular season. So add 35 on top of that, you're looking at 262. That puts him already at QB 30. And then again, you typically have about one rushing touchdown every 100 rushing yards. So add 12 more points on top of that. That gets us up right around QB 24 range. So I think you're absolutely right, Nick, that if Ty Thompson gets this job and they can replicate those passing numbers a little bit with a little bit of extra rushing thrown in there, probably a pretty solid spot to grab a potential pretty safe quarterback here at the very end. And that's just us in my opinion, us being decently conservative with the rushing numbers, just only 250. I'm not saying he needs to run for 500 yards for this to happen. So just something to note to throw out there. All right.
Sure. And one thing, and I'll make this quick. I probably am going to stay away because maybe I'm just too gun shy when it comes to trying to make that best case scenario. That sounds to me like 3 or 4 different things have to go right, and then maybe he's a top 25 quarterback. And maybe he blows up. Maybe he becomes potentially just the group of 5 superstar quarterback, and I totally missed out. But there's so many quarterbacks this year that I feel like we know are all right, this is the guy, and the system is has a track record of success, whether it's this particular coach who's been there, or he's second year in the system, or whatever it is. But there's so many experienced quarterbacks who seemingly have a job just sewn up, that I feel like in a best ball I'm going to get 4 or 5 of those guys that I just don't even have to worry, is he going to end up getting the job? So maybe I miss out on the seemingly, to me, right now as we sit, somewhat rare potential that Ty Thompson's a top 25 quarterback. But I just feel like there are other safer options where I just know I'm going to lock in a top 30, top 40 type guy, and avoid the worst case of scenarios where things maybe don't work out, however often that could happen for Ty Thompson.
Oh, I agree 100%. Let me look up Ty Thompson's ADP right now, right? He's the 97th quarterback off the board, going round 20 plus. This is not a dude I'm asking you to, if you're willing to buy into the scenario I presented just a second ago. This is not a dude you have to spend up money for.
Sure.
This is a dude that you can grab as your 5th, 6th, maybe 7th quarterback on your team. So,
yeah, great point.
All right, let's go to Alabama. You're looking at Alabama, of course. Like you said, Nick, you're looking at teams that provide tons of information. And honestly, quite surprisingly, Kalen DeBoer has been extremely open with Alabama's practice in terms of who's getting what reps and everything. I think I heard a rumor that they're having more open practices this spring than they've ever had before. It's a very different vibe down in Tuscaloosa than we've seen under Nick Saban and everything. So, Nick, I guess the question is, what are we finding out? What do you think is interesting, and what are those known unknowns that we're looking for with some of these teams?
Yeah, well, it's all relative, I suppose. The second practice for Alabama this spring was open to the media for a period of time, which on the one hand, hey, it was the first time the media has been at an Alabama practice since the 2021 preseason. So that's great. On the other hand, that's not necessarily on the high end of most open spring practices we're going to get. But I do agree. I mean, Kalen DeBoer has been, he's answered questions when people have asked. He told us it's a very, very basic thing, and who would have expected otherwise. But he told us that Jalen Milroe took that first snap. He's the guy who's leading the quarterback drills right now, and so that's good to know. There are certainly some coaches out there who would say, "Who? Jalen Milroe? Never heard of him. Don't know what you're talking about." So that's good news. As far as what are we learning so far? It sounds like it's basically number ones, as much as we want to read into who's first in line at whatever drill in the second practice of in early March, between Justice Haynes and Jam Miller at running back. So that perhaps is notable. If we really want to read into it, maybe that's a situation where those guys are going to share number one reps. It seems like, among wide receivers, Jeremy Bernard is in a good spot. Kendrick Law and Kobe Prentice seem to be, those three as the first among the group. And in a lot of drills, it sounds like there's CJ Dippre, the returning starter at tight end, is a little bit banged up, has a non-contact jersey. So not sure that that's something that's going to impact his availability come fall, but maybe just something to file away and note. But I think in a lot of cases, as much as they are opening things up a bit, they're also going to try to shield some things. So, most of us, and I think I would fall into this camp, expect Jalen Milroe. I mean, he's the leading returner as far as Heisman Trophy votes goes from last year. I don't think he's really in danger of losing this job, but also there was a drill where they sort of split up, two quarterbacks here, two quarterbacks there, throwing to whatever receivers, and you're trying to figure out, okay, who's number one, who's number two, who's number three, and they split up Milroe and Mack. So should we, does that mean Mack is number two? Does that mean Mack's not, we can try to play all those situations out in our minds. And sometimes with spring reports, I'll try to find as much information as I can, but I also try to stop myself from reading too much into every little piece of information. But earlier, quicker answer I could have said is we've learned a few things, but with so much still yet to be determined as far as guys who are unproven, especially at running back and wide receiver, we probably haven't learned all that much just yet.
No, I would definitely agree with you. Again, we're super early on and everything, and Kris K and I discussed the wide receivers last week, and like you said, we don't know enough to definitively say, like, all right, who's going to be the number one, number two guys and everything. Regardless, they're all going too late in a lot of drafts, so you should be able, in my opinion, you should be comfortable taking shots given the system we have here. But what I don't think we're talking about enough is the running back potential at Alabama. Wow, that's a wild sentence for me to say, considering how CFF's gone the last couple of years. But again, like, Kalen DeBoer has produced some solid CFF running backs. Nothing crazy, nothing like a Mike Gundy type or like a PJ Fleck type or anything like that, but some solid running backs, right? Like, this goes back to my theme of known unknowns. Like, I think Kalen DeBoer can produce another solid CFF running back here. I mean, think about Dylan Johnson last year, Ronnie Rivers in 2020 to 2021. Go all the way back to his time in Indiana, where Stevie Scott III, that's a name for some of you that have probably long forgotten about, but he was a really solid CFF running back back in 2019 right there. So we know he can do it. It just becomes a matter of, one, do you believe that he is willing to shift here and have it just be a backfield of Haynes and Miller? He's done it before with Jordan Mims and Ronnie Rivers a little bit. But also, again, like, if one of these guys does break out, who's it going to be? The ADP difference between Justice Haynes and Jam Miller in my opinion, is a little crazy at the moment. Justice Haynes is currently the 33rd running back coming off the board. Mid to late 7th round is his ADP. Meanwhile, Jam Miller, a guy who's had an extra year at Alabama, a little bit older, a little bit beefier. He's an inch shorter, but about 6 pounds heavier. He's being taken as the RB 114th off the board at the end of the 20th round. So 13 rounds of difference between these two guys. And like you mentioned, Nick, like as of right now, they're kind of co-sharing that number one role. I love Justice Haynes. I think he's the more talented of the two backs. But if these two are kind of neck and neck right now in terms of where they're at camp, I'll take the guy going 13 rounds later and just kind of seeing what kind of value he can provide. Now, you can play devil's advocate as well and say, like, well, Miller's been there a year longer, and the fact that Haynes is already pretty much caught up with him is a good sign for Haynes, in which case I would say I agree. Like, again, there's signs that Haynes is just a better running back. I mean, last year he ran for 6.5 yards per carry versus Miller only running 5.4. Like, there's signs that Haynes is a really, really good running back, and I don't blame people for believing in him. But also, like, Miller going 13 rounds later just doesn't really make a ton of sense to me. What is your kind of reaction to that analysis, Nick?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And like I said, I don't want to read too much into, this guy went second when they were just running through bags before practice really started. But I haven't seen much or read much to indicate that there's that much difference between, okay, Haynes has this job locked up. He's going to get 65% of the available carries, So if that's the case, and we're trying to game out, what's the likelihood of Justice Haynes living up to that level of difference right now in their ADP? It seems relatively low to me. So yeah, Jam Miller, I think, has some value right now. So I agree with you.
Alrighty, let's move on to our next school here. Again, going zigzagging between Power 5, G5 schools here. Let's go talk about the UAB Blazers. We'll stay in Alabama for this one. And again, going back to the known knowns here, right? Known knowns. Jacob Zeno will be the starting quarterback again for the UAB Blazers. That is really good to see. Side note, I think Zeno's hella underrated in drafts right now. Again, finished raw QB 35 last year in total points. When you account for his missing game, that puts him up to QB 27. And then you take into account that he threw for only 20 touchdowns on a little over 3,000 yards and 445 passing attempts. And there's multiple games where he threw 35 plus times and came away with one or less passing touchdowns. I think that there's some touchdown regression that should be able to come his way this year, especially if, as I'll mention here in a second, if this running back room either takes a little bit of a step back or there's not that clear, reliable guy like a Jermaine Brown Jr. was last year for the Blazers. So, just side note, I think Zeno's very much underrated. But again, that's a known in my opinion. We know that Zeno's pretty solid for CFF. He was a startable option for you multiple times last year. What's the known unknown here? Well, the known unknown is that Jermaine Brown Jr. is gone, and we got to figure out who's probably going to replace him at running back here. My initial thoughts was I was kind of sold on the Isaiah Jacobs comeback party, right? I was honestly sold on the idea that, he and Jermaine Brown were pretty much even to start last year. So if he comes back and nobody else really steps up in that backfield, he could be immediately in for that Jermaine Brown Jr. solo treatment that Brown got after Jacobs went down last year, which was, by the way, an RB3 pace, not like top 36 top 3 RB pace after Jacobs went down last year, Brown was doing. So I was sitting there thinking, man, Jacobs could be in a huge value right now. But there's a couple problems. One, Jacobs really only had one good game. It was his last game against Tulane, 18 carries, 95 yards, and 2 touchdowns, 3 catches for 11 yards. Then he got hurt, right? Out for the entire season. So you already have him just coming back from injury, and he, very much outside of that game, not very good. Again, 4.2 yards per carry against NC-A&T, which is not exactly great competition. 4.2 yards against Louisiana Lafayette, only 9 carries in that game. Again, 10 or less carries in each of his first 4 games there. So again, nobody that they're really going to. Again, against Tulane, he got the carries, but again, then got hurt. The other part of this is that I can't just automatically slot him into Brown's role because Jacobs is straight up just a huge downgrade compared to Brown when it comes to receiving. Brown averaged almost 10 yards per catch last year, while Jacobs was at 3.7 yards per catch. And Jacobs' ADOT was almost 3 yards behind the line of scrimmage. So there's tons of opportunities for him to get absolutely blown up on different plays that lead to negative yardage there. So very much a risk there in the fact that, again, there's a clear downgrade from Brown. And then the third major problem is a guy by the name of Lee Beebe, which is he's a redshirt sophomore coming into this year. After Jacobs went down, Beebe took over as the secondary back and quite frankly just outperformed Jacobs in almost every category. Beebe got 6.9 yards per carry on his 52 attempts, ended up with 360 yards and 4 touchdowns. Jacobs got 100 less yards on more attempts. So Beebe, younger, seems to be just a better performing back in that regard. Receiving wise, Beebe has both a better ADOT and yards per reception. Again, his yards per reception was 7 compared to Jacobs' 3.7. And it's not like Jacobs only got a couple of catches and they all got blown up. Like, no, Jacobs had 17 catches last year and averaged 3.7 yards. So this is very clearly just an inability to get open there. And then also, Beebe's pretty good size. Like, again, he's 10 pounds lighter than Jacobs, but he's still good size at 210 pounds. I'm not quite as sold on Jacobs as I once was, and quite frankly, like Beebe's going later than Jacobs in a lot of drafts. I'm kind of making that shift over to Beebe, given where they're at. Now this could end up being how Brown and Jacobs started last year, where it's a split backfield. Neither one of them are all that great, but like I'm going to count on one being the guy. I'm going to go with the guy that just straight up outperformed the other last year. And then last little note here, again, that's my whole spiel on the running backs. Wide receivers, this is what I'm kind of looking for. They lose Taquan Palmer, they lose Jermaine Brown Jr. and Fred Ferrier, 3 of their top 4 receiving options for last year. They bring back true sophomore Amare Thomas, who I love, led the team in targets last year, so that's a really big deal for them. They also bring in an interesting addition from the transfer portal, Jamoy Mays, the transfer from UT Chattanooga. Go Mox, that's for my cousin. Nick, you might be able to shed a little bit more light on Mays and his potential impact here. But Palmer last year had 63 receptions, 1,000 yards, and 4 touchdowns, and finished as wide receiver 58. So it's not like, top-end wide receiver here. And they do tend to spread things around at UAB, but with them losing their top 3 options there, is it possible, Nick, that you think that we could see Thomas, or again, maybe you can enlighten me on Mays, as potential just funnel targets? Like those two become the top options for Jacob Zeno this year, but he doesn't have nearly as many options as he did last year. I know I threw a lot at you, so like just kind of pick an area and just go with it.
Yeah, no, it is a lot of really good stuff. I certainly wrote down the name Lee Beebe, somebody that really was kind of off my radar. But, when you discuss what he did last year, and especially down the stretch where he got a little bit more opportunity in the last 3 games or so, put up some pretty explosive numbers. And that I think is worth, for me, digging into a little bit more. UAB is a really interesting team on the whole. One, I'm not 100% sure they've started practice or they haven't. I've been referencing, anything I can find on Twitter, but something that's super helpful for me, Brandon Marcello of 247 Sports has tried to, over the last few years, put together a very useful chart that has spring, start dates, end dates, spring game dates, all that good stuff. UAB is one that, as of right now, all we know is their spring game is April 6th. By all indications, that means they should be starting spring practice. I mean, North Texas's spring game is April 6th. They started March 2nd. Everybody else who has a spring game scheduled for April 6th started in February. So I think UAB is probably on the practice field, but I just, did some more if you were watching on YouTube while Jared was talking and I'm, off staring off in the corners because I was trying to Google like UAB spring practice updates, and usually they get a lot of great coverage. AL.com and Dudley, shoot, I forget his full name. Wanted to say Evan Dudley, does a great job covering UAB. But right now there's just really not any information. So maybe UAB is one of those programs who is just, completely shut it down, doesn't want the media to really cover the practice or let a lot of news come out. But they are a program that I would love to find out the answer to some of these questions and at least get some clues, because, you bring up some really interesting points about Beebe and looking into, his big play potential. I think is something that is worth noting. Perhaps if we're trying to read into it a little bit, with Jacobs being more of a bruiser, Beebe could, maybe it's the thunder and lightning situation like you were discussing earlier. That certainly I think could be a possibility. So I don't know. I don't have a good read on the running back situation. I was very, very skeptical this time last year. I think you and I discussed it maybe around this time, maybe a little later in the spring, but I just didn't love Jermaine Brown Jr. and was just highly skeptical about the UAB offense as a whole. I have completely changed my tune on that. I really, really liked what I saw last year from this coaching staff, the way the offense was constructed, the way they used Jermaine Brown Jr. I was completely wrong about him. So really missed out on, some solid performances there. But is it that Jermaine Brown Jr. was a unique offensive weapon? Because he really kind of was.
Yeah.
Can we, expect Beebe or Jacobs or whoever to step in and be that productive as a receiver? I'm not so sure. Now that could open up more opportunities if not, if we are going to see a little bit more of a traditional, this guy's a running back and he's going to, not be used in the slot like Brown was on occasion. Like I believe Brown actually had multiple starts at wide receiver technically last year. But if that's the case, then is that going to create more opportunities for guys like Amare Thomas, for Jamoy Mays, for somebody a little lower on the depth chart or the returning production database? Of Bryce Stamus at tight end could perhaps have a little bit bigger role. TJ Jones, Iverson Hooks, who started at times as a true freshman last year. So I am very, very curious, because I was impressed with UAB. A lot has changed, and I don't have a great read yet, partly because of a lack of information, partly because there were kind of some unique players, who were highly productive, Brown being the big one, that I'm just not sure that role is entirely going to exist this year. But focusing in on wide receivers a little bit, I don't have a ton to offer on Mays beyond just, the stats, and they were good, over 1,000 yards last season. And he was, a deep threat, averaged 16.7 yards per catch last year, which makes me think that he's probably more likely to step into that Taywan Palmer role, because he and Thomas, though they were targeted almost exactly the same amount of times, Palmer was targeted 64 times. Thomas was actually the top target last season at 67. Their average depth of target was miles apart. It was 11.2 for Taywan Parker. It was 5 for Amare Thomas. So, that really limited Thomas's opportunity as far as big plays and getting in the end zone and, that sort of thing. Yeah, he was better on a, if you're in a PPR league, but that had some additional value, I should say, not better. But with that being his role last year, are we likely to see a repeat of that, where he's sort of the screen guy, the short slants, move the sticks, stop routes, hitches, that sort of thing kind of guy, and Mays steps in and he's more the deep threat? Or Thomas coming back and being a veteran in this system? Is it, hey, now it's your turn, you're going to step into this role that we have carved out as sort of our number one guy. So
Mhm.
I would love to find some more information about that. Unfortunately, I've talked a lot, but haven't offered much as far as answers. But you bring up, some really, really interesting questions. But I do think that, as you said, first and foremost, Jacob Zeno is a quarterback I like. The numbers are weird, partly because of that extremely low average depth of target. But he's going to be put in position to be productive, and I agree that there's a chance that he's going to put the ball in the end zone, both through the air and on the ground, a little bit more than he did last year.
Alrighty, let's move on to LSU here. Sorry, I would love to talk more, but again, we are running long. I've already accepted the fact this is probably going 2 hours, which is fine because we are talking excellent coverage here. But if we don't want to go 3 hours, I have to put a stop at one point.
Let's talk 3 hours. The CFB Winning Edge podcast. No.
Pretty much. Let's talk LSU a little bit here, Nick. I personally. Again, if people want to hear our discussion on the different wide receivers, we talked about Kyron Lacy last week and CJ Daniels, and if people want to, they can go back about a month ago when you were on last time, Nick. We discussed CJ Daniels and his impact as a transfer. I would prefer we avoid talking the wide receivers here. I think quarterback is a known here. It seems like Garrett Nussmeier. Again, there's some people who kind of throw out the idea of like, oh, maybe AJ Swan. No, I think Garrett Nussmeier's pretty much locked this up. All that's left to me really to discuss here at LSU is the running back situation, at least for fantasy-wise, and obviously Mason Taylor we like, but running back situation-wise, what do you have to offer there, Nick?
Yeah, and I won't go long on wide receiver or quarterback, but I think I've come around to your way of thinking quite a bit more on Kyron Lacy, just for what it's worth. And also at quarterback, AJ Swan's third in the drills right now.
Yeah, is he really? Is he behind Ricky Collins?
He is.
Wow.
He's probably going to end up second, I would expect. But yeah.
And here I thought there was nothing to discuss there.
If you're thinking, I mean, again, he's a transfer coming in. It's
true.
One practice open to the media. What does it really mean? But yeah, I'm 98% confident that Garrett Nussmeier, maybe even 99%, is going to be the quarterback there and set up in a pretty good spot. But at running back, yeah, there is a little bit, I think, to discuss. You mentioned it. I mean, the room basically cleared out other than Josh Williams and Caleb Jackson. And Josh Williams is just one of those running backs who, wasn't recruited very highly coming out of high school. So he doesn't, stack up particularly well the way that I calculate player ratings, but he just won't go away. And so Caleb Jackson probably has much higher upside, but I think that Josh Williams is going to be a factor, is going to get carries. He's a player that this coaching staff seems to trust, which I think carries some weight. But right now, those two are the only scholarship running backs on the roster, or on, I should say, the practice field. There is another scholarship running back to consider, and that's Trey Hawley. He's dealing with some very serious legal issues that he is currently away from the team, and probably shouldn't expect that he'll make a major impact this fall, if ever again. But you mentioned that Jackson is sort of the hot name in the room, and I understand that. I liked what I saw from him in
for sure
a pretty small sample last year, and think he's the better of the two. Think he'll probably end up as the leader in terms of production out of the two of them. But I'm not sure the gap is as big as the current ADP, and I'm not sure that Josh Williams won't emerge as the guy who gets goal line carries, for instance, and kind of limits Jackson's high end upside. So I agree with you. I think that Williams right now, bit of a discount, and could end up in a closer to 50-50 split, or possibly even sort of nosing his way into, not that I'm expecting him to be Clyde Edwards-Helaire, but this situation reminds me a little bit of that time prior to 2019 when Edwards-Helaire was a major afterthought in CFF drafts.
When John Emery Jr. was the hot name.
And, he emerges just sort of as the player that the staff trusted the most. And so he just happened to be in a situation where he got a ton of production and it really paid off if he took a flyer on him late. Maybe Josh Williams is not exactly that, but maybe it's a little closer to that sort of situation than most people seem to expect it is right now.
No, I would certainly agree. Again, I'm not telling everybody like I am predicting now that Josh Williams will outproduce Caleb Jackson. Like, guys, I watched the film. I can see that Caleb Jackson, in my opinion, is a better running back. I think he's more explosive. He's definitely got the higher ceiling of the two right now. But I can't ignore the fact that in the bowl game, Caleb Jackson got 3 touches versus Josh Williams got 12. Right? Like that has to mean something at the end of the day there. Now, granted, we didn't get to see a ton of rushing production from the Tigers in that game regardless because they fell behind so quickly that Garrett Nussmeier basically had to pass all over the field in order for them to catch up. So I think you can only take so much away from that. And again, it's one game. But also, again, you're looking at Jackson.
Play color. Yeah.
Also different play. You know what? That's a great point, Nick, as well.
Same staff, different play color.
My big thing here is I really think that this is a big target. Like LSU's running back field has a big target painted on it right now. This says spring transfer portal candidate all over it. They're going to add somebody, and it's going to cause people to be a little tepid about Caleb Jackson. It really depends on who did they get out of the portal, but they're going to add somebody, right? Like depending on who enters the portal. So is it going to be like a Noah Cain where, it's enough to get everybody to kind of back off a little bit? Maybe it doesn't mean anything at the end of the day like Noah Cain did as well. Or is it like a Logan Diggs where he comes in, has worked with the staff before? Again, not that Logan Diggs was like a world beater for CFF last year, but clearly was probably the most trusted guy in that backfield last year. So we'll see. Again, time will tell. This is all speculation, but I would bet good money that, again, like you said, Nick, they only have 2 active scholarship running backs on this roster. You cannot be LSU and go into the fall with that. So, all right, let's move on to not a group of 5 school. Again, it's difficult for me to classify what to do with Wazoo and Oregon in terms of like Power 5, G5, whatever. I just call them independents at this point. But let's talk about Wazoo. Let's talk about the Washington State Cougars here. And obviously, Ben Arbuckle sticking around for another year is honestly, quite frankly, a minor miracle in this day and age for CFF. Like a super, super effective offense at his last 2 schools. I would be shocked if he's still here after this year. But regardless, he is here. And that means that this is a system, in my opinion, that is worth investing in, right? Quarterback, we assume that John Mateer is that next starting quarterback. He was the backup behind Cameron Ward last year. They did not bring anybody in through the portal in the fall. They did go after Diego Pavia, which I think would have been very interesting to see the battle between those two. But if Mateer is the guy, he's at an insane discount right now in drafts. He's being drafted as a QB 69, 18th round. I think half of those picks are mine. But this is, like I said, this is a staff. This is an offensive coordinator that's been instrumental in providing us top 10 CFF QBs 3 years in a row. Cameron Ward last year, Austin Reed the year before that, Bailey Zappi the year before that. Like, this feels like it should be a slam dunk. I, at one point, ranked Mateer in my top 12 quarterbacks because I was like, yeah, no, if he's the guy, like, he has to be a top 12 quarterback given the system. I cannot shake the feeling, though, that Wazoo's going to be portal shopping coming out of spring. And so in terms of like my known unknowns and everything like that, this is less of a competition because, again, I don't think there's anybody on that roster that competes with Mateer at the moment. I will be looking at all those practice reports and looking to see how do they describe Mateer. Are they describing him as a guy that's in command of the offense, comfortable with the system, performing well? Or are they talking about like, oh, he's still picking it up? Is he a guy that is struggling with certain concepts and stuff like that? Because that'll give me an indication pretty quickly of, alrighty, if he's still struggling by the time mid-spring comes around, I almost guarantee you they're going to bring somebody in through the portal. Versus if he's strong in command of the offense, I will feel much better about taking him. Well, I already feel pretty comfortable taking him where he's at right now because he's super, super cheap in the 18th round. But I'll be more comfortable moving him up my rankings if by the end of the spring it's pretty clear that he'll be the guy moving forward. The other piece of this offense that is, of course, what everybody wants is the wide receivers, right? Kyle Williams feels like the safe pick, of course. Wide receiver 64 last year is wide receiver 3 on this team. They lose Josh Kelly, who is wide receiver 33. They lose Lincoln Victor, wide receiver 34. So opportunity abounds on this team. Williams should be fine, and I love taking him as like my 3rd or 4th wide receiver if I really don't love my wide receiver start. Do I think he has the upside of some of the other wide receivers in this system? Probably not, but again, if you can give me a base floor of top 40 wide receiver, I'm feeling pretty good about that. The cash prize of this offense, though, is a slot receiver. We all know that, right? Lincoln Victor last year, 7 games over 10 targets, finished as a wide receiver 34 with 2 games missing. Had he played all 12 games, he would have been wide receiver 16. He was a top 10 wide receiver before he got hurt early on in the season, so he's on fire start. So to me, I'm going to be looking at who replaces him, right? I like Carlos Hernandez. I've mentioned him several times before as a true freshman. He was 4th on the team in targets last year. So I think he's a pretty easy choice to replace Victor in the slot. He played half his snaps in the slot last year. But here's kind of my main problem with Carlos Hernandez. Yes, he was 4th on the team in targets, but his first 6 games, 26 targets. Last 6 games, 6 targets. So something clearly happened from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. I don't know if he got nicked up. I'll have to take a look at it. He's going to be a name I'm looking for. And then his competition, in my opinion, is going to be pretty fierce. You got Kris Hutson. He's a transfer wide receiver coming in over from Oregon. And already some Wazoo beat reporters are saying they potentially see him taking over that slot over Carlos Hernandez, which could make for a very interesting case there. Again, Wazoo's also bringing in Austin Peay, wide receiver Trey Shackelford, and LA Tech wide receiver Kyle Maxwell. But both those guys primarily played outside last year, so I'm not as worried about them. But that Kris Hutson transfer definitely has me quite worried about Carlos Hernandez, and I'll be paying attention to who's standing out between those two come next year, or come this spring and onward. So again, Nick, long diatribe there. A lot there. What do you think about Wazoo? Quarterback, wide receiver, what are you looking for?
Well, first of all, I probably should have cut you off a little earlier because there's a player that we have forgotten about. And Washington State actually did bring in a quarterback transfer who is going to be a factor. I think that John Mateer, I still would categorize him as the favorite to win the job, even though he didn't play a ton behind Cameron Ward. I remember, this time last year reading spring reports and in the fall, which I do expect or hope at least that we are going to get some really good Washington State coverage when they open. But Mateer is going to be challenged. There is a FCS transfer, Zevi Eckhouse, coming in from Bryant, which is the 3rd best FCS program in Rhode Island. So maybe not, playing the toughest competition. The numbers are, good, but not jump off the screen at you. He came up a little short of 3,000 passing yards in 11 games last year, 28 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. Did have the exact same yards per attempt that Cam Ward did last year. So we'll see how that factors in. It's not like he's a huge threat to run the football, but did have 350 yards on the ground last year for Bryant. So he'll be a factor. So that might sort of limit Mateer a little bit. But I do think that Mateer is, at least 50-50 to win this job. I don't think this is necessarily a situation where they brought in Eckhouse and are prepared just to hand the job to him. I think the staff really did like Mateer, and other than that, the room is cleared out a bit because another quarterback that they seemed really positive in a lot of the reports I read last year, Emmett Brown, has transferred to San Jose State. So Mateer and I think Jackson Potter is still there, but other than that, it's probably him and Eckhouse. But I totally agree with you on wide receiver. figuring out who that slot receiver is going to be. This time last year, I was overly committed to, or even into the summer and early fall, overly committed to DT Sheffield because we heard so many glowing spring reports as a junior college transfer coming in. And would I do it again? Yeah, maybe, because that role has been just incredibly productive at Washington State. There really wasn't any evidence to suggest that, certainly wasn't any evidence to suggest that Sheffield was going to leave the team after
I would say quit
a couple of games.
Yeah.
and 3 weeks. But regardless, they played out, and based on what's coming back, Kyle Williams is in a good spot. He did briefly enter the portal, but returned. Hernandez, read a lot of glowing things about him last year. It was good to see him out on the field and not putting up huge numbers, didn't have a touchdown, but was a factor, did get playing time, significant playing time as a true freshman, 200 routes run. That's gonna pay off a little bit this year, I think, as well. But a couple of those names coming in are interesting. Shackelford, good numbers at the FCS level last year, and Maxwell, at La Tech didn't do a ton, but he's somebody who has played a decent amount of football and could certainly be a factor. But kind of like Mateer, even though they have brought in people to supplement the room, I'm not sure that any of these guys were brought in as they're going to hand a job or one of those premium that slot receiver spot to one of these guys. I think that you can feel pretty good about drafting Kyle Williams and do think that Hernandez is set up for a productive year as well.
So you're not worried like me at all about Kris Hutson?
Well, so I don't know. He kind of fell off he just kind of disappeared last year. I don't remember. Was it an ongoing injury or something, or did he just get passed up because Oregon found other guys? But he was a starter in 2022. Still was never really super productive. So it's hard for me to really know, because he only he played in one game last year, I think.
I think so. Probably shut it down early to preserve his red shirt.
Potentially. So I don't have a great read on it, to be honest.
Okay.
He's somebody that I need to figure out exactly what happened last year. If it was just an injury that knocked him out, then yeah, maybe. But if it was just other guys emerging and him disappearing, then I'm not expecting him just to come in and be a superstar. Certainly, maybe he might be a little bit of a somebody to take a flyer on. But I'm not going to put a whole lot of. My expectations are not super high right now. If we come out of spring and hear glowing reports and he's the second coming of DT Sheffield, then maybe I'll buy in.
Ready to make the same mistakes twice.
Certainly
I love it.
Didn't work out last year.
No, it's all good. Like you said, I did the exact same thing last year, so I don't think anybody investing into DT should feel that bad about it. All right, let's move on to our next school here. I don't have a lot to say about what I'm looking for with the Clemson Tigers, Nick, but again, you brought them up, so it sounds like you have some pretty interesting tidbits to bring up to people. So I'm just going to basically throw it over to you, sir, and the show is yours. What do you got out of Clemson?
Well, Clemson is a team that intrigues me. It is a program that is up and running with spring practice. A little bit of news, I suppose. Tyler Brown is limited early in spring practice after recovering from an injury. Adam Randall got apparently tweaked something in practice one, so just something to keep an eye on. Bryant Wesco, the talented true freshman, has already got the message boards buzzing, and some beat reporters are pretty high on him as well. Not quite Jeremiah Smith levels, but still some plenty of excitement, and seems like he's going to be a factor as a true freshman. Noble Johnson's had a little bit of both legal and injury issues that are going to sideline him this spring. So the wide receiver group is an evolving situation, and not 100% sure how that all is going
That's
to
a
shake out.
kind way of saying a mess.
Potentially, but Antonio Williams was severely limited by injury last year. I actually haven't seen a whole lot of major updates on him, but assuming he's back and fully healthy, I think that he's in line for a bounce back. I'm liking what I'm hearing as far as Dabo Swinney and Cade Klubnik talking about increasing the tempo. That I'm kind of buying in on, hey, this guy has entering his second year, and we do have the second year of Garrett Riley and Cade Klubnik. So I do expect them to take a jump. Maybe they're not going to be, as great as we thought perhaps they would when Garrett was first hired and when Klubnik, ascended to the starting role. But I think that, I'm fairly optimistic about Klubnik, and I think optimistic that wide receiver group is going to shake out decently well. But it sounds like Phil Maffa is in line for a really, really, potentially heavy workload. I'm not super worried about the redshirt freshman behind him, Green and Hayes, or Keith Adams as a sophomore. I know there is some buzz for true freshman David Izumume, and my apologies if I mispronounced that, but
That's pretty
it
solid.
seems like it's Maffa, and just the other guys are just going to kind of spell him when needed, is kind of my initial read. So I do think that there's reason to be pretty bullish on Maffa for Clemson, but the quarterback situation and Klubnik really kind of intrigues me, honestly, because I do think there's reason to hope that we're going to see a bounce back after a fairly disappointing start to his full starting tenure last year.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind. Again, I wouldn't mind seeing the Garrett Riley offense actually, be there this year. It felt like we didn't really get to see that fully unfold last year. Again, part of it was injuries to wide receiver, as you mentioned, and like losing Antonio Williams, obviously, huge deal probably for them to start the year. Tyler Brown kind of band-aided it a little bit, but again, he's injured now. We don't have any updates on Antonio Williams. Like I said, the receiver situation is just a complete mess over there. Troy Stiletto is your top returning receiver that's not injured currently, because Bo Collins transferred over to Notre Dame. That's a bit of a messy situation to deal with, in my opinion. I'm personally out. I was looking at the ADP of the Clemson wide receivers right now. Tyler Brown, again, he's limited right now. His ADP currently is roughly about the 14th round, 14th, 15th round. People are taking him. And then you're looking at Antonio Williams. People are willing to buy back into his bounce back a little bit, but right around the 18th, 19th round is where he's typically going. Again, if you're a believer in either one of those guys, I think that's fine. Just knowing what I know about Clemson last couple of years, knowing what I know about Garrett Riley and how much he likes to spread the ball around, I'm personally out on those guys. But you're definitely getting both those guys at a much bigger discount than what we were seeing Clemson wide receivers get last year.
What's Jake Brenningstool doing? Where's he right now in
Let me look that up for you.
ADP.
He is currently the 9th tight end off the board, and his ADP is end of the 12th round. So I think he might be the best value out of all of them.
Yeah.
So, alrighty. I don't really have much else to say about Clemson, so I think we'll go ahead and move on. Make that one of the shorter segments. Buy some time for the last three, and I'm sure we'll make up for in a long discussion about one of these players here in a second. I don't know who, but we'll see. Or I could just stop
20
talking.
Good minutes on Cam Ward. You ready?
Yes, sir, I can do it. But before we get to Cam Ward, let's talk about another G5 team. Let's talk about Georgia Southern. All right, Georgia Southern, Clay Helton, obviously they lose the offensive coordinator, Brian Ellis, to Alabama, who becomes their tight ends coach over there. So they promote from within. You assume that this is going to be a just repeating the same system that they were doing last year, keeping everything in-house there. Obviously, a guy like Brian Ellis, very talented offensive coordinator. You hate to lose that. But if you assume that Georgia Southern does not take a step back because of that change right there, because Clay Helton's still at the helm here, there. There is, again, it's a system that we like in CFF. Now, it was a bit of a letdown a little bit last year. Again, we were drafting Davis Brin in like the top 24 QBs. He finished QB 43. Caleb Hood finished wide receiver 35, much better than he did the year before. But Derwin Burgess, who everybody was drafting at probably the top 20 wide receivers, finishes wide receiver 78. Jalen White can't stay healthy again. But regardless, it is a system that we do like. Again, we recognize that last year was a bit of a setback, but we're hoping it kind of picks up again this year. But that's going to be hard when you lose Davis Brin, who only had 1 year of eligibility, and you lose Caleb Hood, who was probably the one consistent thing on this offense last year. Who's going to step up with those two gone? At quarterback, the options appear to be either last year's backup in J.C. French, or they could go with Indiana transfer Dexter Williams, who makes me, like, the idea of him potentially starting in this system makes me want to vomit because he cannot pass the ball to save his life. Now, granted, again, going from Indiana to Georgia Southern, Big Ten to Sun Belt, maybe he can do a little bit better against that level of competition. But I'm personally hoping for J.C. French, a guy that's been in the system for at least a year now. He's kind of been built up in this system. I think I liked what I saw out of him last year. I'm personally hoping he does well, and honestly, again, like, he is a dude that if I look up his ADP right now, I guarantee you he hasn't even been taken in almost any drafts. Yep, I type in. Oh wait, I'm still on tight ends. Oops. Nope, not school player. Yep, he doesn't come up. Like, he just straight up has not been in any draft so far this year. So, if you were a big believer in Davis Brin last year, that's the guy you got to be looking out for. I'm going to be looking to see if he takes control of this job here pretty early on, obviously. And then at receiver, again, running back, we pretty much known there. Jalen White's back for another year. They're going to try to get him 25 touches per game, just like they have the last 2 years, until he gets hurt again, which is the unfortunate part of Jalen White and why he doesn't go higher in drafts. But at receiver, Burgess returns. Obviously, that makes sense, probably as expecting him to be the top option for the Eagles. However, we've seen in this offense, they can produce 2 100-target receivers in each of the last 2 years. So, and if you know me, 100 targets is pretty much, again, that golden number. If you can get a receiver to, I think it's a good CFF pick. So, who's really going to be the second option? I think the two candidates are either Dalen Cobb, third-year wide receiver for the Eagles, been kind of, again, brought up in this system. Never underestimate the guys who have been with the system for a long time. Or you can go with the big fish, small pond approach, and you can look at LV Bunkley-Shelton, who transferred from Arizona State, looked really good early on in his career, went to Oklahoma, did jack squat, and is now moving down a level to Georgia Southern here. And if I remember correctly, I believe he does have a connection with one of the coaches there. I can't remember what that connection is off the top of my head. So another thing, if you like LV Bunkley-Shelton, to keep an eye out for. Both Cobb and Bunkley-Shelton are going free in drafts right now, so you can invest in either one you want. But I'm going to be looking out for who gets the buzz out of those two right there. Or maybe a third guy comes along and turns out they're the best wide receiver amongst them. Nick, what do you think about Georgia Southern? What do you think are the kind of the known unknowns that you're looking for? You are currently muted, sir.
I believe that this is another team you bring up. The teams that you wanted to discuss are really interesting to me because they're teams that I don't have a great read on, unfortunately.
Well, that's the whole point.
Don't have a whole lot of extra information on. Yeah, I thought you were supposed to be, serving me up some softballs here and be like, oh,
absolutely not. That was the teams that you picked, sir.
Right, exactly. So Georgia Southern, yeah, it's a little bit tricky. So I took J.C. French at the end of a lot of drafts last year. I know that in this day and age of college football, we shouldn't really spend too much time worrying about like, oh well, this guy is second on the depth chart and he's going to move up because they probably are going to bring in a transfer anyway. And Georgia Southern did. Whether or not Dexter Williams is actually going to be able to win the job, there is a little bit of concern now that, hey, yeah, it's not necessarily just going to be handed to J.C. French. Part of the reason why I felt comfortable going for him in some spots last year is, some of the intel, especially in, early fall camp, was very, very positive about J.C. French, who was a transfer from Memphis. So it's somebody that Georgia Southern went out, targeted, brought in specifically, kind of, gave him a year to groom him. It seemed like to be ready to take over when Davis Brin moved on. Got a little bit of playing time, so that I think gives him a bit of an edge here. But
He played in 10 games.
Right. And so, that's a good sign. But then they went out and brought in, a power conference transfer. So you kind of, that makes me a little bit nervous in JC French moving on. Partly right now, if I'm going to take one of the two of them, it's probably going to be French, but it's mostly, in a pretty low stress situation where, if I can add a couple of shares of him pretty late, then yeah, sure, as a bonus, because even though his rushing numbers were better than Davis Brin's, he's not going to be super productive on the ground, I don't expect. And so this is mostly a pass only situation, and partly because guys like Jalen White, as you mentioned, OJ Arnold, I mean the running back depth, the guys they have coming back is pretty long. We've seen Georgia Southern run the football a little more than I expected the last couple of years, quite honestly. And who's to say that as they make a transition at quarterback, they don't end up leaning a little bit more to the run. So I think that, French is probably 75-80% or so to be the week one starter. But I'm a little less excited about his upside than I was of David Brin last year at this time. For the wide receivers, I think Derwin Burgess is somebody that I will look to invest in, because even if they lean into the running game a bit more this year compared to last, they're still, and even though Ellis moved on to be the tight ends coach at Alabama, I expect Georgia Southern to want to do a lot of the things schematically that they've done the last couple of years, and that's put the ball in the air fairly often. And somebody is going to get a lot of targets. Derwin Burgess was second on the team in targets last year. He had 109. So expecting that, he's going to potentially be in line for those, 130 or so targets that went Caleb Hood's way last year. And Burgess, had a solid season overall. I agree with you that Dalen Cobb and LV Bunkley-Shelton probably worth a flyer, because again, we just talked about there were two guys last year who were targeted well over 100 times, and the second guy ended up catching 6 touchdown passes, 800 yards, 74 receptions. So one of those two, I think, is going to be pretty productive. I remember reading some really good things about DeAndre Buchanan, who was a true freshman last year, played in 12 games, was a special teams performer. So maybe he's going to climb the ladder a little bit and become more of a factor at wide receiver. Jalen Barton they brought in last year. Do believe that he is back for another year of eligibility if my information is correct. So it's not necessarily clear cut that it's going to be Cobb or Bunkley-Shelton, but I agree with your read that those are probably the most likely two, and I kind of trust the guy who was a major contributor last year in this offense, and that's Dalen Cobb. So I'm most excited, probably the only player for Georgia Southern that I'm going to actively target is Derwin Burgess. But if a guy's free and I'm able to take a flyer late, I think Dalen Cobb would probably be that next player I'd be most interested in.
Let me look real quick and see what kind of ADP we're getting for Georgia Southern wide receivers. It looks like that, again, currently Derwin Burgess is the only one coming off the board, and his ADP is wide receiver 24 at the end of the 5th round. So, and again, so Cobb, LV Bunkley-Shelton, basically free. All right, let's move on to your last team you wish to discuss here today, Nick. Miami Hurricanes. Again, we talk about known knowns, known unknowns. I think the known knowns here are that Cameron Ward will be the starter at quarterback for them. It seems pretty cut and dry. I think the known knowns are that Xavier Restrepo and Jacoby George are your two wide receivers to invest in here. I think the unknown knowns are just overall in general, how well does this offense click under Shane Dawson, his second year with the Hurricanes? How well does it click with Cameron Ward? And then also the running back situation, right? I don't think Miami's had a healthy running back room in half a decade. They bring back a lot of guys: Henry Parrish, AJ Allen, CJ Johnson, Trevante Citizen, and then obviously Mark Fletcher, who led the team rushing last year, who is injured. Varying reports about the severity of that injury right there, whether or not he'll be back for playing time next year. So, Nick, what's your read on this team? What are you hearing, and what can we apply to our CFF drafts moving forward?
I did catch your conversation with Chris K last week, and believe Cam Ward was the first name mentioned, right? As far as
Yes, sir. We
high.
Yep.
And so we don't have to rehash all of that. I agree with a lot of what you said. I did happen to catch a Miami podcast this week as well. The Athletic has a good one. Manny Navarro does a great job covering the Hurricanes, and I trust his read on a lot of things. He mentioned some reporting, talking to Shannon Dawson. Sounded like Dawson alluded to potentially calling 0 designed runs for Cam Ward in 2024, which certainly caught my ear.
That's not great.
If you're looking, if you're looking at, this is a guy who, the overall numbers as far as rushing yards weren't great, but had 8 touchdowns last season. Well, if a guy's not going to be running, zone read or be put in harm's way, down by the goal line, because he could just hand it off to Mark Fletcher or Henry Parrish or AJ Allen, then that's something to consider. Is that probably a bit of an over exaggeration? Yeah, maybe, because Cam Ward can run it a little bit. It's not that he's a full blown dual threat that we're going to expect a huge amount of rushing production for, but that's at least one piece of information that based on last year, different offensive systems, so he's probably going to throw it a little bit less well. He's probably going to score fewer rushing touchdowns, as you guys mentioned, but a little bit of added information to say that, yeah, there really is potentially an indicator on that. That makes me think, okay, maybe these Miami running backs are going to have a little bit more value, because I'm not going to have to worry about Ward down by the goal line, poaching touchdowns too often, unless he's scrambling for them. But because we don't know 100% how healthy Mark Fletcher is this year, because Harry Parrish Jr. is back, am I super excited about that running back room from a CFF standpoint? Probably not. But one player I really am excited about, and part of it is because, talk about Manny Navarro covering Miami, and there are a lot of great beat reporters who do as well. And kind of like what I said about Jeremiah Smith and the way that beat talks about him for Ohio State, I have never heard such just rave reviews through, mind you, 2 practices, as what I've heard about Cam Ward in Miami. And just, apparently his accuracy is pinpoint. Players can't stop raving about him. Coaches can't stop raving about him. We're seeing highlights of 50-yard, connections, great catches by Xavier Restrepo. Apparently there are 3 or 4 other 50-yard bombs that have already happened in practice, and so that goes against a little bit of the CFF, mindset that we've got, that Cam Ward maybe can't complete deep passes. I'm not sure that that's currently the expectation at Miami, but Xavier Restrepo, who was targeted nearly 120 times last year, 85 catches, seems like he and Cam Ward have a real connection. Restrepo is one of those guys who's been quoted a lot, loving the way that Cam Ward has come and ingratiated himself on and off the field. It just seems to be clear that he is far and away the number one receiver at this point in spring camp, is expected to be that guy this year. And I know when Austin Nace took Restrepo a little earlier than some thought he might be worth in that very, very first CFF draft. I'm not so sure. I see it. I think that he is going to be just absolutely peppered with targets, and seems like they're going to have an opportunity to make some real big plays as well. So I'm a little less sold on Jacoby George. I know it potentially he could be seen maybe as a little bit of a value. The numbers look good last year. I haven't heard quite as or read quite as much as far as glowing expectations for him. There seems to be sort of a real jockeying for that number 2 position, with guys like Isaiah Horton being in the mix there. But did hear some good news. Elijah Arroyo is back fully healthy. Sounds like there's going to be more of or there is some optimism that the tight end position is going to be more of a feature in this offense, which it really kind of disappeared last year with Riley Williams being the top guy, Cam McCormick more of a blocker. But Arroyo has a different skill set that really should emerge, and he already is taking the vast majority of those number 1 reps. So that's a little bit of good news coming out of spring camp. But I agree with what you guys talked about with Cam Ward, and perhaps he's still going a little too early. But man, they seem to really love what he has done in a very short time down in Coral Gables, and I think that Xavier Restrepo is going to be the major beneficiary. I don't see a drop off in his numbers at all. I think there's even perhaps a little bit of room for improvement, especially as far as touchdowns and big plays go.
Yeah, and again, let me swing back to you talk about Austin drafting Restrepo early in that first draft. I admittedly was one of those people who, when he first did it, I was like, "Whoa, I don't know." I was like, I don't know about that early. But then again, like you said, I went back and looked, and again, I love high target guys. And again, he had over 120 targets last year. Again, I said 100 targets is a great CFF pick. 120 targets, if you can get to there, that's an elite pick. That's an elite pick in my mind. And so you add in the fact that Cam Ward comes from a system that heavily targeted the slot beforehand. He's very comfortable taking, again, we talk about already about how there's concerns about him being able to hit deep balls. Well, I mean, with Restrepo, he doesn't even really have to hit that many deep balls in order to get things going there. So again, I've come around on Restrepo. I probably still have him a little bit too low in my rankings right now. And quite frankly, I haven't been as aggressive enough in terms of getting my shares of him. So I think it's, yeah, absolutely. All right. Last team here, Nick, and then we'll get out of here and let everybody else go home that is listening to us. But I think this last one's worth it for those of you who are still listening, because I think I have somewhat found, not a gem here, or I think it's a gem, but also like maybe you guys will prove me wrong. But let's talk about North Texas. A lot of interesting players to discuss here, right? So quarterback, there's a lot of talk about Chandler Morris coming to the Mean Green, and then all of a sudden, Chandler Morris's dad, getting hired to Texas State, and a lot of people are saying like, well, Chandler Morris isn't on the field yet for North Texas. He's not coming until the summer. Maybe he changes his mind, goes to Texas State. Well, I think with Jordan McLeod committing to Texas State, probably safe to assume that Norris will stay put at North Texas. And I feel like there's been tons of rumors for as long as both Chad Morris and Chandler Morris have been in college that every time Chandler Morris transfers, like it's like, oh, he's going to go play with his dad. He never really ends up doing so. So we'll see. But again, Chandler Morris should be good. Chandler Rogers, the quarterback from last year, was QB 18 in this system. I think Morris could probably easily match that if he is truly the guy. Now, again, it's a little concerning that he's not coming in until summer. Could provide an opportunity for somebody else to step up, or also makes it to where he doesn't build that chemistry up nearly enough that we want him to. So we'll see. Running back, I think, is interesting because last year is just a complete mosh pit between a bunch of different guys, but honestly, like Ayo Adeyi had a better year than I remember. Like I was thinking like, oh, it was a full committee last year. Nobody had anything really going for them. Well, Adeyi, 143 yards, 1,000 yards, and 6 touchdowns on the ground, finishes the RB 70. Obviously, the touchdown numbers there not great, but the fact that he was running at almost 7 yards per clip in this offense last year, very efficient rushing system, and honestly makes me rethink my loyalty to George Pettaway at James Madison over there, because like Adeyi's a better running back than I was giving him credit for. So I'll definitely take a look at that situation there. But regardless, Adeyi, Oscar Attaway, Isaiah Johnson all transfer out after this past season. So this running back room is now just completely wide open outside of Ikainka Ragsdale returning, and he was injured after one game last season. Or not one game, it's like 2 or 3 games into the season he was injured. So he's coming off of injury. This makes me very intrigued in Zach Evans, the former 3-star running back at Minnesota. Looked pretty good for the Gophers at times. And if Ragsdale doesn't recover quite well enough and UNT doesn't add anybody else, like Evans could fall into a workhorse role in an offense that rushed for almost 2,800 yards last season. Now, granted, again, there's a lot of things here, right? Like, again, I talk about Ragsdale's injury. Well, Evans has his own injury history to worry about as well. So I can't discount it for Ragsdale or discount it for Evans and then play it up for Ragsdale. They both have injury concerns there. But given that North Texas doesn't really seem to have anybody else, maybe they dip into the portal in the spring. But I think this running game might be worth a little bit extra look at the end of rounds right now, because like Zach Evans doesn't come off until late. Ragsdale I don't think's come off in any draft that I've seen him. Given both of their injury history, it could be one of those scenarios where it starts off with the two of them, one of them goes down, and then all of a sudden you're looking at a workhorse role and again a really good rushing offense. So a little tidbit there, but that's not even the gem I'm talking about. We need to talk about the part that people really want to hear about with this offense, with the Eric Morris offense. Who's that next big receiver, right? Who takes over that Jay Maclin role? Jay Maclin finishing wide receiver 21 last year. Top 10 wide receiver for a good chunk of the year. Kind of fell off a little bit towards the end there. The candidates, I think, are clear. And I think there's a clear favorite among the bunch. Because when you think of this offense, you think of a couple names. You think of Damon Ward, who was the second outside wide receiver last year outside of Jay Maclin. DT Sheffield, who we were talking about earlier, follows Eric Morris from Washington State. I think there's a little bit there of he originally committed to Eric Morris, didn't like the new coaching staff, hence why he quit on the team a couple games into the season. It makes sense that he ends up with Eric Morris down here at North Texas. Landon Sides is a true he'll be a true sophomore this year. True freshman last year. I believe he finished 4th on the team in targets. Did really, really well as a true freshman. So I think those are the 3 names that people you'll see people drafting in drafts, like taking their shots here. But DT Sheffield and Sides, and even Blair Conwright, who's another name that people might throw out there as a potential guy to invest in, they're all slot guys. Go and look at Eric Morris' system the last couple of years, and you'll see the outside wide receivers are the guys who get the love. Last year, Jay Maclin, as I mentioned, wide receiver 21. Year before that, obviously, Eric Morris' system didn't quite work out at Washington State, but who were the top 2 guys? Donovan Ali, Dejon Stribling. Both of them outside guys, both of them leading the team in targets. 2021, in that incredible year that Eric Morris had at Incarnate Word, Taylor Grimes, Darian Chafin, 120 and 110 targets respectively, led the team in targets, both outside wide receivers. He's going to have his quarterback throw to the outside. And the clear guy that's coming back with the most experience is Damon Ward. And Damon Ward you can get super late in drafts right now. I think that he is a guy that will be rising as we go along. I'm going to be paying attention to these Mean Green practice reports to see if there's anybody else kind of popping up, maybe surprising people. Maybe they do some weird stuff where they shift a guy like DT Sheffield out to the outside. Like stuff like that has happened before for sure. Just because a guy played in the slot last year doesn't mean they play in the slot this year. But for right now, given the information I have, like Ward is a huge value in my opinion. So Nick, again, I rambled again, but what were your kind of takeaways? What do you think is interesting? And do you think I'm crazy for loving Ward as much as I do?
No, I love it. And I love the way you laid it out as far as because there are a lot of systems, and I've mentioned this before, where I honestly, for the most part, don't really buy too much into, oh, this guy was a slot, oh, this guy was outside, oh, this is, the position you want. There are some exceptions, and I know yourself and Nate Marquise has definitely done a lot of research on certain systems where the slot really has a long track record of success. I think it's overblown more often than not, but when it's clear and the record just shows year after year, regardless of from one stop to the next, as you just laid out with Eric Morris and the outside receiver positions, I have to take notice, and if I don't, I'm just not taking advantage of what the evidence suggests. And pulled up some practice reports from today. North Texas is going through spring practice. There's a Denton Record Chronicle piece written by Brett Vito, who does a great job covering North Texas, and they're fortunate enough in that major market to get a lot of good coverage for a non-power conference team. Damon Moore is the first name mentioned. He is mentioned often as far as quoting here. Ward is in position to help lead the group after posting the yards he did last year. Second name mentioned, Blair Conwright and Landon Sides, guys that you've mentioned already. It is worth noting, briefly talking about the running backs, Ikainka Ragsdale is not currently available for spring practice, so that perhaps even, to your point, is something to suggest that Evans is going to be maybe in position to be the first guy out of the two of them. But Ragsdale was, you mentioned the guys who moved on and were very productive. He was good enough to force him himself into that, to make it sort of a three-headed running back position, and at points he was the top guy before he went down with injury. So I think that Ragsdale specifically is probably a pretty good value right now, but agree with your point that Evans can and maybe will emerge as a productive running back as well. But a couple of other names who are mentioned among the newcomers, something that jumped out to me, the first name mentioned is a true freshman, Mason Ferguson, an early enrollee from North Crowley, quote, has turned heads. So what does that mean? I don't know, but maybe write that name down.
Are they turning their head in awe? Are they turning their head to throw up in the bucket next to them? Like,
I would imagine as a true freshman.
I'm joking.
Exactly. But that sticks out to me. This is the first time I have ever read the name Mason Ferguson. Apologies to him if he's going to be a future Hall of Famer. But hey, he's worth noting here. He's been mentioned by the head coach early on in spring practice, and his name here is in print as someone specifically making people take notice. Transfers Jeremiah Aaron, DT Sheffield, and Dalton Carnes are among the other receivers mentioned by Morris. So does that mean DT Sheffield is worse than Mason Ferguson? I don't know. We probably shouldn't read too much into it, but
yeah, we're 3 days into practice.
But I think your point about Ward is a great one, and he's somebody that we really should pay attention to. He's somebody who's been there. He is the most experienced among the guys returning. Sometimes it is easy for us, especially when a team like North Texas is undergoing so much turnover, bringing in so many guys. Sometimes we just want to pencil one of those newcomers in to that spot that a Maclin is leaving. But I think you're right that Ward is probably the guy you want. That the evidence suggests, not only is he the top guy returning, but he's taken on a leadership role. He's the first name mentioned in print, first name out of the coach's mouth. The guy who's getting interviewed, sometimes, believe it or not, that to me, I think is something that we need to take note of, because coaches, usually don't make everybody available to the media. Usually it's the guys that they can trust the most, and how well, somebody conducts themselves in an interview doesn't translate to the field, but it shows me a level of trust that is at least a data point that we don't see in the numbers, but could be somewhat of a factor. So it's nothing but a positive sign.
No, I agree with you 100%.
And so I think that Damon Ward, is somebody that we definitely should notice and should expect is going to be a major factor in that offense.
I agree 100% with that point. It was how I found a guy like Terrell Vaughn, like a couple years ago when with Utah State and everything. People were going after Brian Cobbs, deservedly so. But I kept pointing out, I'm like this JUCO transfer wide receiver Terrell Vaughn, like they keep mentioning that he's like one of the leaders in the room, and he keeps talking to the press. Like that's nothing but a good sign for his future value in this offense. And I grabbed him in pretty much every dynasty league that I could. And man, oh man, did that benefit me last year? Trust me. So, like I said, I think it's a very good point. All right, Nick, we're pretty much right at the end here. Besides the team profiles you got coming out, you said you're trying to hit those sometime in April, which I think might be the earliest that you've ever been able to release those. So that'll be huge in terms of getting that value out there. Again, full depth charts for everybody, fully understanding like, all right, who all is involved at each of these schools, who you project to each of the different spots and everything. That'll be huge for people as like a little cheat sheet right there. Anything else you got going on, Nick, that you're working on?
Well, so that's the biggest piece for our members, for those who are currently all 22 or C2C Winning Edge members at campuscant.com. That is the next big piece of value for them specifically. For everybody else, Campus Canton YouTube channel, it's been almost every weekday for the last month. We've done Good Morning College Football with myself, where I go through about an hour of news from spring camp, some updates on some of the team profile stuff, talk about particular teams that catch my interest while researching them, while updating their 2024 team page. Also, responding to other things that are put out in the media. I talked about coaching earlier this week, looked at how our ratings different positions compare to what we can expect from the EA Sports College Football 25 when it releases later this spring, or later this summer, excuse me. So that show is packed with information, and I think definitely worth checking out, especially if you want to know more of these types of things that we're talking about as far as spring camp goes. But the team profiles is certainly the next big major item on the to-do list, and I have to thank the team at Campus Canton for helping us get it closer, expected to publish, if not the very earliest, it's certainly the earliest in a little while, because we've just continued to add more and more information year after year. But thanks to Jarek, thanks to Colin behind the scenes doing a lot of things to help speed up the process has been huge, and we hope that's going to pay off. If we can sneak it out a little bit earlier in the month of April, I would absolutely love it. But it's probably going to be, May 1st is kind of that target. So at the very, very end of April is probably going to be the earliest it's going to be. But yeah, keep an eye out for that, and check out the daily morning show, almost daily, college football, Good Morning College Football on the Campus Canton YouTube channel.
Yeah, tons of great nuggets from Nick every single morning on that show. Again, like you said, sometimes you do fun stuff where you talk about head coaching rankings from like a big media head, or you talk about the player ratings, but also you bring tons of great spring information, and it is a great place for people to go and just have their little daily dose of, here's what's going on around the country. And maybe like you're focused on your teams, but here's what's going on over in Miami. Here's what's going on over at Ohio State. Here's what's going on over at Bama, stuff like that. So,
and it's not just the Blue Bloods. I do.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Try to do 10 or so minutes. Sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 15 on a team of the day at the end of each show. And one of my favorite ones of those that we did this past week was San Jose State, where there was a lot of information that we were able to gather from some of the sites that cover San Jose State, but also that's the period of time where we really dig into the returning production and things like that. And it's pretty G5 heavy right now. But the last 5, 10, 15 minutes of each show is usually dedicated to a random team, and we hope to hit every all 134 FBS teams by the time the season kicks off, once all is said and done.
My favorite part about that segment is that you started off with the newbies with Kennesaw State. That was quite a challenge you threw up for yourself immediately there. So if you want a quick place to go learn about the newest team in the FBS, there you go right there. All right, in terms of what we got going on over here at CTN, again, we're continuing to chug along. We got spring camps. There's going to be tons of news for us to talk about. Again, we talked about like what we're looking for today. Probably next week will be a little bit more news heavy in terms of what we're seeing around the country. Nate and I got our third episode of the Defending the Natty podcast coming out to you guys this upcoming Friday by the time you guys are listening to this, so the 13th of March. Again, we're going to be discussing some things that we're doing in our leagues that were helping us prepare for the season down the line, as well as you'll get to see my initial CFF Dynasty rankings, as mediocre and varied as those are going to be. So we'll definitely see. Should be a great time. But until then, that brings us to the end of our show. Thank you all for listening. If you have not already, leave that like, leave a comment, leave a subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. And if you're on the podcast side of things, follow the show and leave a 5-star review wherever you can. Make sure you guys check out the rest of the Campus to Canton podcast network for shows ranging on pretty much anything you can think of related to the college fantasy game. We'll see you guys back here next Monday. Like I said, we'll be covering some more spring news and stuff like that. Until then, really appreciate you guys and hope you have a wonderful and blessed week. See y'all.